Hi, everyone. Welcome to your lecture on race in the media. For the sake of this lecture, I also call it Race in the Cultural Imagination, because we're going to be looking at different types of media and how race shows up in these different forms or modalities. So, what is media and what type of media are we talking about? So, media is considered things like print. So, you have newspapers, magazines, broadcasts, so radio, TV. I know these things are a little bit more dated, but are still significant cultural texts and sources for us. Then you have digital. So, we have our websites, we have social media, all of those things, right? Now, this can also encompass things like streaming platforms. You have apps, virtual reality, interactive websites, things of that nature. So, what is the significance, right, when we're looking at media? Media can either contribute to, it can help create a single story. It also has the power to create alternative narratives. So throughout this course, we have looked at a variety of texts. We've had the traditional, let's look at a textbook excerpt. Um, there's also, the ability to look at things like political cartoons. We've studied executive orders. We've also looked at legislation. Sorry if you guys are hearing a lot of noise in the background. Um, I live in like a very urban area, or maybe you're not hearing anything at all, but I am. So I thought I'd just disclaimer there. Um, anyways, so when we're talking about a text it basically refers to any type of cultural medium that can be analyzed for meanings, messages, and contributions and understanding a greater culture or something on a more macro level. This can connect to things like history, identity. Text goes beyond the written word and can encompass other practices. It can encompass other materials. So our traditional texts are things that literature, historical documents, essays, journalism. While a cultural text are things that are maybe not written, maybe they are delivered orally. You have films, television, performance, architecture, and one of the most recent ones that we've taken a look at, like fashion, being one of those. Alrighty. Sorry, guys. Um, there's also behavioral or social texts. So rituals, um, social behaviors. This can help us analyze a culture, their daily activities, how they live their lives. And then these things can be interdisciplinary, right? So they can cross over multiple fields. So, some key features. Text can have multiple meanings. This is where we have to consider things like context, the who, what, where, taking that information as we dive into like an interpretation of something and how texts are interact with one another rather than viewing them as single solitary pieces, but seeing how they can connect to each other. And then a cultural lens. If someone is analyzing something through a cultural lens, this is through a certain perspective, a framework to understand a trend, a phenomena, or a reoccurring pattern. So, in that same vein, we also have the study of semiotics. This is looking at signs and symbols, their meanings. So, when we apply this to texts, whether they're written or visual or cultural, semiotics focuses on how meaning is created, excuse me, and how it is understood through the use of signs. So that's kind of piecing things together and creating um, the analysis, the critical thought, the so what. I don't know why it keeps doing that. So for a few examples, you can have language and imagery. You can have cultural codes and context, so how meaning is shaped by cultural norms. Power and ideology. How does a text reinforce or challenge a societal power structure? For example, analyzing how a TV show portrays gender roles through its characters, dialogue, and behavior. We'll get into another example of this later. And then audience interpretation, how different audiences might interpret the same text differently based on their own cultural background, their experiences, or their beliefs. So, some examples of semiotics, you could analyze a political speech. You can look at the language, symbols, maybe the gestures or the verbiage that are used to appeal to a specific audience. Um, Analyzing an advertisement, analyzing a film, looking at how they use music or sound, something as subtle as lighting. Product placement in an advertisement or even in a film, slogans, right? This can help reinforce cultural myths about success, um, what is the status quo, or beauty. Okay. Sorry, guys. I know we're going through a lot, so just hang in there with me and we'll get through it together. So in regards to a film analysis, so I don't know if we have anyone interested in film or um kind of like looking at popular culture, but when we are breaking down a film, and this is going to tie into your assignment, um we can look at what's happening at the time. This could be prior to the release date, and then when the film is released or being viewed, it also can take on its own um cultural interpretation as well. So some themes that we can take a look at as a class are, the concept of the American dream, power and privilege, identity and belonging, assimilation as well, race and ethnicity, gender dynamics, immigration, assimilation, and then class struggles. So, when you're analyzing a film as a text, you can look for certain visual or auditory signs. This can be colors, costumes, um, the storyline, what is the character development? And then how does the narrative structure reflect American cultural narratives or ideologies? And then how do these techniques shape the audience's interpretation of themes or messages? So, some of the cultural lens, which are similar to the key themes that we can look at, are race and ethnicity, gender and sexuality, class and power, and national identity. These are just a few examples that we can consider, especially particularly going through this course, and looking at American media. These are really great, like macro lenses to use when asking yourself questions about media. So when we're looking at power and ideology, this can come down to things as simple as representation. Who is represented? Who is excluded? Um, Ideology. How does this connect to the film's message about societal norms and power structures? And it kind of, from there, you can make an analysis on whether the film reinforces or challenges dominant narratives, or is it possible that it's doing both? And this doesn't necessarily have to be a film. This can be a show. This can be a video. we're just using the sake of a film for, for an example. So for to give you guys a more clear or like direct form of looking at the cultural lens, but specifically with gender, there is a popular cartoonist and writer and graphic memoirist named Alison Bechdel, and they are the author of Fun Home, Are You My Mother, and Dykes to Watch Out For. So Bechdel is very well known for the depth and honesty and exploration of gender and identity and family in their work. So, what's really interesting about their work is, and I think I have it here. Let's see. Maybe it copied. Hold on. Okay, here it is. Um, so there is a famous um litmus test, I guess you could say, called the Bechdel test, which is for assessing the representation of women in fiction. And Bechdel is quoted with this argument of in order for a piece of work or media to pass the test is that there needs to be two female characters. They need to talk to each other and they need to talk to each other about something other than a man. And if the work does that, then um, it's capable of passing this Bechdel test, which I think is really interesting of looking at like gender and representation of gender in media. This week, you guys are going to be looking at Twilight as an example of looking at things through the analysis of race. And so you'll be spending some time with that this week. And even if you're not super familiar with the saga provided from the books to the films, there is some interesting analysis and rhetoric around the Twilight series and what happened in the early 2000s. So you'll kind of get a take to look at that and then maybe compare to some media that you guys take in. And let's see. I also want to include one other thing. Okay, so modern media and race to kind of bring these things all together. I wanted to tie in some more recent films. I know that it's crazy. It's to think like, wow, it's 2026. So some of these films are approaching like close to their 10-year mark. So for example, Black Panther, released in 2018, that displayed a positive portrayal of African culture. Um, and this film countered a stereotypical portrayal of Africa. So you can do an analysis, for example, on the Black Panther film. You can create arguments about with context, is it serve or is the film effective in creating an alternative narrative, right? Um, you also have the celebration of Afrofuturism, which is a cultural movement that combines African heritage with futuristic technologies and themes. And this resonated globally and sparked discussions rather about the potential and resilience of African diasporic communities. So that's one example. Another more recent example I would like to give you guys is the film Zootopia, which um, I believe they are on track, or maybe by the time you've seen this way, they will have already released the second film of Zootopia and looking at it through a cultural lens. So this is just some brief history about the film and the media as it was being released. So the film was originally announced in 2013, and while we discuss themes of maybe prejudice or possibly even police brutality, while those are not new topics, I would say that since COVID, they definitely have sparked more conversation. So knowing that, taking a look at, what happening during the release of Zootopia, you have the US presidential election, police shootings and violence towards law enforcement. You also have the Brock Turner case happening at this time. So if we're doing a film analysis of Zootopia, the film does center on Judy Hopps, who's the first rabbit on Zootopia's police force. And Judy is thought of as a trailblazer. She's underestimated because she is a bunny. And she's not really taken seriously in her role. And now you could break this down to a range of things. For example, I think you could tie into, does it have to do with um in the film they do it through the lens of her, her size, and that there's a stereotype that bunnies are not capable of defending, right? And that she's smaller and physically weaker, and this helps the audience gain sympathy. Now, what's interesting about this film is they do this theme of predators who have gone savage, reverting to their animal roots, saying that, oh, the film stages it as so this animal kingdom has evolved beyond and become a utopia and move past possibly, dare I say, a racial or gendered society. So it's interesting when they start to bring in her friend, or who becomes her friend Nick, who is a fox who has certain stereotypes that follow him. So throughout this film, um, you start to see the villain emerge. Sorry if I'm giving out any spoilers, who is a sheep. So kind of, that what's that saying, a sheep in wolf's clothing. Um, and so the film deals with a lot of like stereotypes, themes of stereotypes and prejudice, but they use it through the lens of animals. It also deals with diversity and inclusion, challenging assumptions, corruption and power, as well as empathy and understanding. So the film kind of tackles a lot. But simply put, the Zootopia film is about what it means to be suspicious of someone else, maybe having a bias or an assumption. And if you put it through the lens of animals, creators have the ability to explore this dynamic without it feeling preachy or maybe like presumptuous. And while it might not do everything effectively, it, I think, acknowledges in a very coy way, stereotypes through cliches and single stories. So as you're kind of thinking about the film, and then this is going to kind of direct you in your assignment for the week. If you've seen the film, what real world issues does Zootopia address through its depiction of prejudice and stereotyping? And then how does the movie portray the effects of fear? When people are in fear, how does that correlate to discrimination on a community? And how might the movie encourage not only younger audiences, but you or any audience member who's watching to reflect on your own behavior or beliefs? So again, this is just a small look into race in the media. There's so many things that we can look at. This is simply just a fraction. Um, but I hope it gives you guys something to think about and what your take is on media and cultural representation. Do these things have significance? Does media reflect back to us, or do we help kind of create the standards or expectations that media perpetuates?